These are some of the technologies we're using right now at PayPal. We're using Bootstrap. They had been building their own component library. They were using aspects of jQuery UI, but they were building a lot of their own components. And I was like, why? Why are we still doing this? Let's just start with, since we're already using jQuery and already moved to that, let's pick something like Bootstrap. I hired Victor Sarin. I don't know if you know Victor, but he was the head of accessibility at Yahoo, and really awesome guy, one of the great guys in accessibility. And so, we want to take the stuff we learned on accessibility, and we'll contribute back to Twitter. We know the guys on the Twitter team and stuff. We're using Backbone, although we found that the problem with putting Backbone within our kind of arsenal was that people use it when they shouldn't use it. It's a little too high powered for most things, or maybe a little too complicated, maybe too much. It's still good. It's a good framework. Of course, underscore. We use less. You could use Sash, but we use less because Twitter Bootstrap uses less, and it seems to fit well with that. Dust and Node and all these other things. And I'll talk a little bit more about these. But we're also not just using these open source tools to empower our framework so we can move really fast. We're also working in an open source model. Probably one of the biggest things that revolutionized, or was there, fortunately, at the time we started that at Checkout reinventing that experience, was internal. We had an internal GitHub license that none of us even knew about. It was already set up. And we stumbled across it, and we're like, wow, we've got GitHub internal. This is awesome. So we put our project right away on GitHub internally. And, and then what's happened over time, it's the same team who was, reluctant about the developers, not trusting the developers, now are moving to a model where they're putting everything on GitHub and allowing pull requests and everything else, so turning into a distributed coding model. And the component team now reports to me, so we're changing all the components so that they follow the GitHub model. So we're replacing this whole centralized component platform, which will fight against your ability to be lean, because you need a distributed social coding model, something like GitHub gives you, to let innovation foster throughout the organization instead of in a centralized team, because it won't happen there, right? And it also gives you a chance to have much more rapid release cycles. And it also encourages every developer to experiment, and we want them creating repos and sharing, and those sort of things like that. So it's just really great. Does anybody else have GitHub internal? I highly recommend it if do you have it? Or,
No, I wish I did.
Yeah, it's really, really worth. If you noticed, Mark Andreessen, who's one of our board members at eBay, his company, they just recently, about maybe 6 months ago, invested $100 million into GitHub, which is not a small chunk of change, because they see this potential that, in my mind, I'm a GitHub convert. I remember a few years ago listening to Linus talk about GitHub and basically saying anybody who didn't use GitHub's an idiot, the sort of things like that. And I said, just what a jackass, is what I thought to myself. And it really made me not want to use, GitHub. This was a few years ago. But once I started using it, it was like, man, I never want to, use anything else, because just the power it gives you. And the way it changes the way you think, and the way it changes developers' way they think about social and distributed coding. It's really powerful. And you have to get around, get by through some of the syntax, and some you have to buy into the way it sets things up with the repos and the distributed nature. But once you do that and adopt the terminology, it's really awesome. But the next step we will be doing is giving back to open source, and this is a different model for PayPal. They haven't really done this before. We have a string of projects similar to Yeoman. We have something called Node Web Core, Node Bootstrap, and it's much simpler than all the things that Yeoman tries to be. Now, why would we do that? Well, Yeoman's too much for us. We don't really want all the stuff Yeoman has, which is a project that Paul Irish has done at Google. It's a good project. But we also, whatever we create ourselves, we don't want it to be proprietary within PayPal. So at the minimum, we want to open source it, and maybe somebody else will get value out of it. But at the very least, it creates a discipline for us to make sure we create something that's reusable by other people and not proprietary to PayPal, just by the exercise of open sourcing it. So even if you don't think it's going to be something that everybody's going to adopt, I think it's still a healthy exercise to release it like that. And then, you know, and even like with Dust.js that we chose, and I can talk about why we chose that, but we're partnered real closely with LinkedIn Engineering on that. And so the LinkedIn engineering team comes over to us, and we go over there. We have get-togethers from time to time. And Richard Reagan, who's one of our teams, is a core contributor back to the Dust fork that we have. LinkedIn forked it, and we're on the same fork. And you know, we're contributing back all the time into Dust itself to make it better. So these are important things. We also have something similar to Bower, and I'll maybe mention that a little bit more later, but Twitter has a project called Bower, and it's basically a way to use GitHub for component management. So they have a service that basically runs and fronts GitHub where the components live, and you can get notifications from it. You can query it for components. You can grab the components, upgrade the components, and stuff like that. We're doing something similar, but it just would work with your internal GitHub. It doesn't require a service to be running, and I think we're calling it Garnish, to be able to garnish your code with components.